Hey everyone, we are back and ready for the final part of our sock, the Afterthought heel. What I like so much about this heel is that it is absolutely interchangeable. You can use it for cuff down socks or for toe up socks, and you can put it into any pattern. So we're going to be using waste yarn today to make our Afterthought heel. And if you need to see how we put the waste yarn in, just head over to the videos for either the cuff down sock or the toe up sock, leg and foot portion. The sock that I'm using today is actually a cuff down sock, which means I started up here on the cuff, knit the leg, put my waste yarn in, knit the foot, and then knit the toe. Now, if you are working a toe up sock, don't worry, this is going to be nearly the same. The only difference is where we're going to orient our sock to pick up stitches. So if you knit a toe up sock, meaning you started down here at the toe, work the foot, put your waste yarn in, the leg, and then the cuff. Don't worry, I'm going to explain the directions on how to do that, just as I explained them for this cuff down sock. To put your Afterthought heel in, you're going to need a few tools. You're going to need needles. I'm using Magic Loop method today, so I have my Chigu red lace, size 1, 2.25 millimeter, 32-inch circular needles, which I've been using for all of my sock tutorials. You're also going to need scissors at some point to cut your yarn and your waste yarn. And then you're going to need a tapestry needle. I like to use this really tiny one that has a bent tip. I'm going to use it for taking out waste yarn, and we'll also use it to do the Kitchener stitch at the end of the heel. The very first step for an Afterthought heel is to pick up stitches. So we'll be picking up stitches just below and just above these two waste yarn rows. After we've picked up our stitches, we're going to join our yarn back in to knit the heel. We'll knit the heel with a series of decreases, and if you knit the cuff down sock, you'll know that these decreases are really similar to how we did the toe. There's one exception, so make sure you keep watching to see just exactly how to do all of the decreases. All right, let's get started picking up those stitches. There are two very important things to note when you are picking up stitches for your Afterthought heel. The first is orientation of your sock. So you want your sock to be going in the same direction that you knitted it with. So since this sock is cuffed down, I'm going to be placing it so that it is going the same direction when I was knitting it. This is the direction of my knitting, so I want it facing this way away from me. When I pick up these stitches, I want my sock oriented in this direction. Now, if I had made this toe up, it would be just the opposite. I would need my toe pointed towards me because this is the direction that I knitted. I would be having it this way so that it's like how I was knitting it, where it goes away from me, and I would pick up my heel stitches in this direction. The second thing you need to know about picking up stitches is you always pick up in the right leg of the stitch. And I'll show you what that means close up in just a second. But just remember, correct orientation and pick up in the right leg of the stitch and you'll be good to go. Okay, making sure that your sock is going in the same direction that you knitted it, in this case, a cuff down sock. Go ahead and pick up your sock right at those heel stitches and grab your needle, and we're going to begin picking up stitches. We're going to pick up the entire row that comes right below this waste yarn. Then in the same direction, we're going to pick up the entire row that comes above the waste yarn. For this part, I find it a little bit easier if I kind of put my hand in the sock. That can be a little harder with toe up, but that's why I'm showing this to you cuff down. You can always work the heel before you finish the toe of your sock if you would like to. So we're going to start right here where we introduce that waste yarn, and I'm looking for my very first stitch, which comes right here. Now remember, I said always pick up the right leg of the stitch. I'm going to loosen these so you can see just a little bit better. My first stitch there in gray. So I don't want to pick up the waste yarn, I want to pick up that stitch that comes right below it. And I want to get the right leg of it. So here's my stitch here. Let me see if I can get him to show you. There he is right there. And I only want to get the right side of him. So I'm going to go ahead and grab that with my needle. just like that. Now I'm going to move on to the very next stitch right next door, and I'm going to get the right leg of that stitch too. And then I'm going to move to the next one. And I'm just going to go along this row right below the waist yarn and pick up the right leg of every single stitch. And I'll meet you on the end because that's where things can get a little bit tricky. I'm at my very last stitch and I want to make sure that I get every single one. So here is that last stitch from the waist yarn, and I need to make sure I grab the right leg of this stitch here. So I'm going to go ahead and scoop that one up. Make sure you try just to get the stitch and not anything else. And then before I continue on, I'm actually going to pause here and count to make sure I have half my total stitches. So again, since I'm working a 60 stitch sock, I should have 30 stitches here on the needle. If I don't, I need to go back and check the beginning and the end to make sure I got those very end stitches. Okay, it looks like I'm all good. I have 30 stitches here. Now I need to do the second half. So what I'm gonna do next is I'm gonna do the exact same thing. I'm just gonna repeat what I did down here, except I'm going to do it with the stitches that come above the waist yarn. I'm still gonna use the right leg and I'm still gonna go in this direction. So to make it easier on myself, I'm gonna pull this needle all the way to the cord. Then I have a little more flexibility when I'm trying to pick up these stitches. I'm gonna take the needle that's still left here on the right-hand side, and this is the one I'm gonna use to pick up my stitches, right leg going in this direction. And I'll count again, of course, to make sure I still have 30. Okay, I've picked up all my stitches. I checked to make sure I have 30 on this needle. So now I've got my 60 total stitches again. So this is the fun part. This is where you get to take out this waist yarn. So starting down here again on this end, I'm gonna go ahead and grab my tapestry needle. And I'm gonna start pulling up on this yarn until I get a tail. And I'm just gonna work stitch by stitch, pulling out the yarn, the waist yarn, a little bit at a time. And anytime you get to a spot where it's kind of like hard to come out, it might mean that you caught it on your needle here and you can just give it a snip. We're not using this waist yarn anymore, so you can go ahead and cut it. We're just trying to get it all out. And the really cool part is that all your stitches should be on your needle, oriented the way that we need them to be to knit them. Make sure you're taking out the bottom row first. That's the very first row that we knit, and it will come out a lot easier. Once you've made it to the end of that bottom row, make sure you get the very corner bit out. You sometimes have to get that first stitch too, and then you should be able to just pull out the top row. It should just unravel very nicely. If it doesn't, like mine's getting stuck right here, it's probably just because the yarns got kind of intertwined. You can work it with your tapestry needle, or you can cut it. You can see mine's kind of overlapping here. So I'm just gonna work that out. Happens. No big deal. There we go. And then it will just come on right out. You can go ahead and toss that waste yarn. We are completely done with it and it can go in the trash. All right, at this point, before I join my yarn back in and start my decreases, I do like to recount and just make sure I didn't lose any stitches along the way. You can also sort of check your stitches, make sure they look like they're all oriented correctly. These look good here. This is why we were so careful with the orientation of our sock and picking up through the right leg. Check this side. Everything looks really nice there. I just need to count and then I am ready to go. It looks like my stitch count is good. I'm still at 60 stitches, so I'm gonna go ahead and pick this up and get ready to get started. So if you'll notice, your needles are over here on the left-hand side, which is not how we can knit them, but don't worry, there's an easy fix to that. Just turn everything right around. Now you're gonna be on the bottom of the foot here if you were doing a cuff down sock, or the other way around if you were making a heel for a toe up sock. We're ready to get started by joining in our yarn for the heel. For this very first round, I am just going to knit. We're not going to start the decreases yet. I like to join my yarn by going into the stitch, getting ready to knit it, then grabbing onto my yarn, leaving a length probably 8 inches long, and I just make a loop and loop it over my needle and then start knitting. So I'm just going to knit until the end of this needle, and then I'll show you what some people like to do when they get to kind of that little gap space in the heel. I will meet you there. All right, I just finished knitting that first needle. I still need to knit the back needle to finish the round. Some people right here like to pick up a stitch right there in between. I actually don't like to do this. I just like to pull really tight when I start my next round. So when I start this next half of the round, I just like to pull really tight on my first stitch so that I don't get a gap right here where my heel is. So I'm gonna go ahead and knit the first stitch like normal. I can pull tight there, but it's really no use because it doesn't hold until I do my next stitch. So when I go into my next stitch, I just like to give it a really nice good pull. Then I'll knit my next stitch with that tension, and then I don't have to pull tight anymore. That usually keeps things really clean right there. And if there's still a little bit of a loose spot at the end, I can go and use my tapestry needle to even up either one of these 2 stitches to make things nice. So I'm just gonna finish knitting to the end of the round, and then I'll show you what our decreases look like. All right, I'm back to the end of the round and I'm ready to start round 2. Some people really worry about this gap right here, but don't worry about it at all. You have a tail that you can use to tighten things up when you're all finished with the heel. So I'm just going to tuck that inside for now. We're not going to worry about it. And again, when I start this next round, I'll pull really nice and tight so that I don't have a gap here in my heel. Round 2 is a decrease round. So I'm going to start with a knit 1. And then I'm going to do a decrease that slants left into the center, a slip, slip, knit. Slip 1 knitwise, slip 1 knitwise. With your left needle, insert it into these 2 stitches so that it pokes out to the front, and that sets you up to knit through the back. Now, if you remember, this is our first round to close that gap, so I'm going to pull nice and tight, and then I'm going to finish that stitch, slip, slip, knit. And now we're just going to knit till we get to the last 3 stitches on the needle to do our next decrease. When 3 stitches are remaining, we're going to do another decrease. This is going to be a knit 2 together that leans right towards the center of the heel. And then end with knit 1. We're going to repeat the same thing on the back needle. Knit 1, slip, slip, knit, knit to the last 3 stitches. When you get to the last 3 stitches, knit 2 together, and knit 1. And that completes the decreased round. Now we're going to alternate a plain knit round with a decreased round until we reach 1/3 of our stitches. If you did the toe for the cuff down sock, we did the same decreases until we got to half of our stitches. So this is different. We need to decrease all the way down to 1/3 of our stitches. So for my 60 stitch sock, I'm going to need to decrease down to 20 total stitches or 10 stitches on each needle. I'm finishing up my very last round, which is a decrease round, and now I am to 1/3 of my stitches, which is 10 stitches on one needle, 10 stitches on the other for 20 total stitches. Now we're going to do the final part of our heel, which is the Kitchener stitch or grafting, and we're actually going to put these 2 rows of stitches together into a very seamless connection. So you're going to cut your yarn first. You need to have 3 to 4 times the length of the stitches that you're working with, which is not a ton of yarn, so just measure that out. And then you can go ahead and cut the yarn with your scissors. Go ahead and thread your tapestry needle so it's ready to do the Kitchener stitch bind off. To get ready for our Kitchener stitch, slide all of your stitches back up onto the needles. We're going to look at them as a front needle and a back needle, and each of these needles has its own pattern for the Kitchener stitch. We'll start with the front needle. The front needle always starts with knit, and we can remember this because we're looking at the knit side of our sock. The pattern for the front needle is knit off, purl on. So let me show you what I mean. Take your tapestry needle, go into the first stitch like a knit, slide it off, and pull the tapestry needle all the way through. You want to pull it so it's even, but not tight. The second stitch is purl on. Take your tapestry needle, go into the second stitch like a purl. This time when we pull through, we're going to leave the stitch on. Now we're going to move to the back needle. The back needle has its own pattern, and it always starts with purl. And we can remember this because we're looking at that purl side, the inside of the sock. On the back needle, we're going to do purl off, knit on. So go into that first stitch like a purl. We're going to slide it all the way off and pull our yarn all the way through till it's even, but not tight and not loose. The second stitch, we're going to work as a knit on. Come right in between your 2 knitting needles, go into that second stitch like a knit, pull it all the way through, leaving it on. I'm going to show you this stitch one more time, keeping these front needle and back needle as 2 steps, but then after that we're going to speed it up and combine it, and I think you'll see that that makes things even easier. So let's do it kind of slow and broken down one more time. We're back on the front needle, which always starts with knit. Knit off, purl on. Go into the first stitch like a knit, slide it off, pull your yarn through to even. Go into the second stitch like a purl, slide it all the way through, leaving it on. Now to the back needle, which always starts with purl because we can see the purl stitches. Purl off and knit on. Go through the first stitch like a purl, slide it off, pull it all the way through. Go into the second stitch like a knit and leave it on. Now we're going to combine things a little bit. We're going to make each needle just 1 step. It's the same steps we're following before, but it's just not as broken down, and you'll see that it makes things a bit easier. So looking at the front needle, which always starts with knit, we're going to knit off, purl on in 1 easy step. Go into the first stitch like a knit and slide it off, Before we pull through, go into the second stitch like a purl and leave it on. Now you can just pull through one time for the front needle. Now let's look at the back, combining these two steps together. The back is a purl off, knit on. With your tapestry needle, go into the first stitch like a purl and slide it off. Before you pull through, go into the second stitch like a knit and leave it on and pull all the way through to even. You can already start to see these stitches come together. It looks so nice and it feels completely seamless on your feet. So let's do those combined steps one more time. The front, knit off, purl on. Knit off, purl on. The back, purl off, knit on. Purl off, knit on. Keep repeating it. Knit off, purl on. Purl off, knit on. Continue until 2 stitches remain on each needle, and we're going to repeat that one last time. Knit off, purl on, back needle, purl off, and knit on. Now you have just 1 stitch remaining on each needle, and we're just going to do the first step of each needle to finish off these last stitches. So on the front needle, just do a knit off, and on the back needle, just do a purl off, and then you can pull through those last few stitches, and your heel is all done. The Kitchener stitch completes our heel, but I do have a few tips for you for finishing your sock. So the first is this little winged bit that you get when you finish doing the Kitchener stitch. What I like to do is weave this in when I'm weaving in this end. So I kind of turn to the side here, spread my heel apart, and I'm gonna weave this in on the inside. So I like to go just 1 stitch below here and go to the inside of my sock. Now when I pull that through, this little wing tip is going to go down. You kind of have to put your hand inside your sock in order to do this. And then you can just pull it through, trying to make sure it doesn't catch anywhere else. See how it's like to poke through? And there you go, that will take care of that wing tip. The other tip I have for you is for these holes on the sides of your heel. They're pretty much unavoidable. Some people do like to pick up that extra stitch, like I said before, but I just don't like to do that. So here we're on the side that's a little bit tighter. It doesn't have an end for us to close this, so we're gonna actually work the stitches. So if you notice, this is actually 1 whole stitch and it will connect to these stitches. So I'm gonna go ahead and grab it with my tapestry needle and give it a pull. You kind of have to find where you can start with it to tighten things up. And then we're just gonna kind of work it down. There we go. So I've tightened up that bit, but now I've got to keep working it where it's connected. So you just kind of have to go stitch by stitch until things even out and it's not as tight anymore. So I just went to the left, now I just went to the right, so now I think I'll go to the left. I'm gonna pull that nice and tight, and then I'm gonna look for where it's connected to. Maybe right here. There we go. and that one's connected over here. So I can pull on that. You just kind of have to play with it. So for this side, it's got a larger hole, and I know that this is the side that has the end on the inside. There it is right there. So I'm gonna flip this inside out so we can get that larger hole tightened up nicely. Now I'm on the inside of my sock and I have my tapestry needle threaded, and I'm just gonna follow the direction of this stitch here. So I'm just gonna come through here, come through this, pull on things a little bit, that helped. Now I'm gonna follow it across here, see what happens here. This is all kind of trial and error. Close that up. You know what, that looks pretty good. I think I'm gonna go ahead and weave it in from there, just making sure that I weave it in probably on the leg or at least the top of the foot. I'm gonna come around one more time, right there. Whoops. And then I'm gonna finish by weaving this end in here. Here's our side that had that end that I could use to close up the hole, and it looks really nice and neat now. No need to worry about adding an extra stitch or anything. Okay guys, that's it. Your Afterthought heel is complete. Remember, you can use this for any type of sock that you do, whether it's toe up, cuff down, patterned, or anything. Have a great one.